As you know, name of current king is Richard, not Richard. As you know, the name of the current king is Charles the
Third.
And we are talking about Charles the First, Charles the Second,
Yes.
and also about Oliver Cromwell. When Elizabeth I died, she didn't have an heir.
Yeah.
There was this tension between her and her cousin.
Yes, Mary Queen of Scots.
But unfortunately, Elizabeth never married. She never had a child. But Mary, Queen of Scots, she did.
Yes.
She had a son.
So he was the next king.
Mm-hmm. And he was James the
Sixth of Scotland, but the first of England.
Mm-hmm.
Scots people still refer to him as the sixth because they're Scottish, and we refer to him as James the First.
He became the king, and he's famous for the Bible.
Yes.
What we need to mention, because that can be your question, is he had the Bible translated
into English beautifully, and it's the King James Bible that is still in use in all the churches in England now.
Mm-hmm. And is it true that the first translation was during the reign of Henry VIII?
Yeah, William Tyndale, yeah. The King James Bible is the one that is acknowledged throughout the United Kingdom, yeah.
We need to talk about Ireland. The tension. What was going on in Ireland?
Okay. Ireland was, at the beginning of James's reign, very Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And this was seen as a disruptive influence. The English governments under Elizabeth and James almost forcibly got people to emigrate into Ireland to balance Protestant versus Catholic numbers. A lot of Scots people who were Protestant went, and English people too, moved into Ireland, took over estates and so on, and therefore the numbers of Catholics and Protestants was better balanced.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it was very unpopular with the Irish, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. And so the areas they created or they moved into were called plantations.
Plantations, and they were imported into Ireland because they were Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately you have Catholics and Protestants. That's when the tensions began and continue to this day.
Going back to James I,
yes,
and his son Charles I, we need to mention that they believed in the
divine right of kings.
What is it, Sarah?
They believed implacably that they were God's representative on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, what they said was what God would have said, did say, and that their power was absolute, with no say from the people that they were governing.
And that caused tension. Because
Yes.
Charles I, he wanted to... So he tried to rule without the parliament.
For 11 years, the House of Commons did not meet. Because the only reason he went to Parliament was for them to vote money for him if he wanted to fight a war or whatever it was, he was feeling poor. And eventually the House of Commons got fed up with that and said, okay, we'll vote you money, but on your side you'll have to do so-and-so. And he said, no, I'm God. No, I'm not going to do what you say.
So he ruled without a parliament for 11 years.
Yeah. And in that 11 years, an awful lot of anger was building in amongst the commoners of the country. Yeah.
But at some point, he came back to the parliament because he needed money.
Yeah.
So there was this growing number of the Puritans in parliament. So who are they? Again,
They are a very strict fundamentalist version of Protestantism, not the Church of England. They were a cult, a sect. So the Civil War began between what we now call the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. They were called the Roundheads because they wore these very round helmets.
and they were the supporters
Of Oliver Cromwell, who was just a general in the army. And the Cavaliers, who were on the royalist side, so therefore they wore the rather flamboyant Jacobean costumes. And the saying is always that the Cavaliers were wrong but romantic, and the Roundheads were right but revolting.
What happened during the Civil War, or what was the consequence of it? So it started in 1642, and then, as you mentioned, Oliver Cromwell. So who was he?
He was just a general in the army,
Yep.
but he was such a good leader that he became the leader of the Roundheads. He was a tactician in battle, and he was obviously a very clever man, politician. And he was victorious. Finally, they captured Charles I and took him prisoner.
And
he tried to escape, but he was pathetic.
yeah, so they executed him, yeah?
Yeah, they chopped his head off, which was an extraordinary thing to do at the time.
Because of the divine right of kings,
Yes.
because of that.
Yes, and once you've killed a monarch, a king, you're a regicide, and everyone saw it as possibly any king could be executed.
That's what you said about Elizabeth I. So she didn't want to kill
Mary Queen of Scots, because
of this.
it sort of opens the way for people to go, oh well, we could do that, you know. I find it tragic. I think Charles I was he was pretty stupid. He should have seen what was coming. He should have known. But I think he genuinely believed he would win the war because he was there by God.
Yes, he was appointed by God.
Therefore, if he's got God on his side, how could he lose?
Nothing can happen.
Idiot.
Yes. And then, so Oliver Cromwell.
Yeah.
What happened after?
Well, Oliver Cromwell was really a Puritan, and he did literally cancel Christmas.
Did he?
Yes. No celebrations. No, a lot of the sports that people played, as football and so on, was banned. Anything, yeah. Yeah, no.
What happened? So England was
A Commonwealth, a republic.
yes, but Scottish people,
Yeah.
they didn't accept it.
Yeah.
So they appointed Charles II.
Once Charles I had his head chopped off, his son, Charles II, was the obvious heir to the throne.
And he became the king in Scotland.
Yeah.
Then the Scottish army invaded England.
Well, Charles II brought the Scottish army to invade England, where they were defeated. Charles II had to hide in a tree, famously.
In the oak tree.
In an oak tree.
And then he fled to Europe.
And he stayed there.
He stayed there. And Oliver Cromwell continued to be the Lord
Protector until he died.
Yes, for 11 years.
And then his son took over.
But he wasn't...
But he wasn't the man his father was at all. And the English people, it was a few lords and earls and whatever got together, wrote to Charles II in France and said, oi,
Come back.
come back, we need a king.
We need a king.
And Charles II was very pragmatic. He said, I do not want to go on my travels again. He knew he had to behave. He needed to use Parliament. He was a very jolly monarch. He had an awful lot of mistresses. There was a lot of gaiety, probably licentiousness, because the Protestants would have deeply disapproved, the Puritans. But he was actually, on the whole, he kept things stable. There was no more persecutions, and he was a good king. He kept things stable, which is all we asked for. He actually came with a fleet of ships, sailed up the Thames. So you could see it as an invasion. But he was actually invited.
It was his glorious arrival.
And we call it a glorious, what is it?
Revolution.
Glorious revolution, but actually it was an invasion. Call it what you will.
1665, there was a major outbreak in London.
Of the plague, actually the whole of Europe, all the way across the European continent, during which, I don't know how many people died. I mean, they say a fifth of the population, possibly more. Nobody knows what the numbers were, but they were huge, absolutely huge.
So there was another plague, because we talked about the
The
Black
14th
Death.
century one. It's
Yes.
the same one, but just come back. Bubonic plague, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. But the following year, there was the Great Fire of London.
Yeah.
And
1666.
And the idea is that the fire burnt the germs, the fleas, the rats, whatever it was that was spreading the plague. Do you know, you've been to London.
Yes.
You probably don't notice, whatever. But, it's got these funny little streets. And
Yep.
when London, after the Great Fire of London, King Charles said, right, we're going to clear it all up. We're going to have straight roads that are wide enough for every, And everyone went, but if you did that, you couldn't, you can't. Oh, no, we won't bother.
So they didn't do it.
No. But they had the plan like Paris did.
Oh yeah, like the Champs-Élysées.
Yeah. And they've all had it great, but nah, never happened because everyone fussed about this church or that church or this person's house or whatever it was. And it never happened. So London is still a maze of little streets and courtyards and so on, which is nice actually.
It is,
but
because you can get lost
frequently.
In a beautiful city. But question time.
Right.
Question number 1.
1. Which of the following statements is correct? A. After Elizabeth I died, her son, James VI, inherited the throne. Or B. After Elizabeth I died, her cousin, James VI, inherited the throne. The answer is B, because we know that Elizabeth I died with no children. Number 2. Which of the following statements is correct? A. James VI of Scotland was Catholic, like his mother Mary. Or B. James VI, it's difficult to say, of Scotland was Protestant. And the answer is B. He was a Protestant. Number 3. Is the statement below true or false? In the 17th century, Oliver Cromwell violently suppressed rebellion in Ireland and established the authority of the English Parliament. A. True or B. False? It's true. And the violence is still talked about today. Oliver Cromwell is still a name you don't mention in Ireland. Is the statement below true or false? A rebellion began in Ireland during the reign of Charles I because Catholics feared the growing power of the Puritans. Is that true or is it false? It's true. What were supporters of the king known as during the English Civil War? A. Suffragettes. B. Roundheads. C. Cavaliers. Or D. Jesters. They were known as Cavaliers, and they were the royalists supporting the king. Which of the following statements is correct? A parliament refused to give Charles I money because they did not agree with his religious and foreign policies. B. Parliament refused to give Charles I money because they did not want to anger the bishops. Obviously it's A. They refused to give him any money because they didn't like his religious or foreign policies.